Now, the last thing I want to do is put a little character in here. So my character is going to be a sphere. So I'll create polygon primitives, sphere. So there it is, and I'm going to get out of this camera view just because I'm going to work with this character a little bit. So I'm going to hit spacebar over my viewport here. I'm going to hit F to focus in on my sphere. And the first thing I want to do is I want to start the sphere up on top of the chair. So I'm going to place him up there, scale him down. It's the R hotkey, and this is W. And you can free transform them in all three axes with that center button there. So I like that starting position. So what I want to do with this is I want to do a little bit of squash and stretch. And I can just keyframe the squashing and stretching, and I'm just scaling it up and down. But I want it to bounce and stretch from the bottom. I don't want the bottom to come up. I want the top to go down. So I'm going to change the anchor point. I'm going to change where the pivot is located on this. And to change where your pivot is, you hit D. So this is now your move pivot tool. So I'm just going to move this straight down, and you'll see it's moving the pivot without moving the object. And what I'm even going to do is I'm going to snap this to the very bottom vertex. So I'm holding V again, and that will snap to whatever vertex I'm closest to. So if I can get it right there, that seems just about perfect. So that's where I want to squash from. So I'll go back to my scale tool, hit R, and we're going to go ahead and animate this. So to enable keyframes, you hit S, and now it will start automatically keyframing. So I want it to start here, and then let's have it squash a little bit, and you see that sets a keyframe, and then it will bounce up in the air. So it goes up. And see what's happened is, since I didn't set a keyframe here, it only automatically keyframed the scale, because that's all I did. I didn't change the translation. So I actually got to bring this back down and set a key for translation, because there's only a key on scaling. So instead of moving it back down, I want it to be perfectly perfect. So what I'm going to do is go back to my first frame, and if I middle mouse click and drag on the timeline, I can go forward in my timeline without changing the position here. So now we're at frame 5, but it's still in the same position that it was at in frame 1. And now I can hit S. So that's now set a keyframe on 1 and 5 that are the same. So all I have to redo is that first squash. So he bounces up, and I want to have him bounce one more time. So I can just copy and paste these keyframes. So I'll hold Shift, click and drag, I'll right click, hit copy. Now I'll go to, let's say frame 12, or let's give it a little more time. Let's go to frame 20. Right click again and paste. So it's now pasted those keyframes. And unfortunately you can't use Control C and Control V because that's just going to copy the object and paste the object into Maya. So you have to use the right click function. So my bouncy ball is not too great. So what needs to happen is he needs to stretch more as he's leaving, and when he reaches the peak, he becomes normal sized again. So I'm just copying this scale value and pasting it in there. It gets auto keyframed. I'll move it up. So that's the peak. I'm going to hit S just to make sure that's set. So that's the motion that I'm looking for. So this is what I want to copy now. And actually what I want to do is reverse this as he goes back down. So I'm going to take this keyframe, middle mouse drag it over to frame 13 and hit S. Now that's copied this keyframe down to this keyframe. And actually I want to give him a little bit longer hang time in the air. So I've shift clicked this keyframe and I'm dragging it over. And actually, I'm going to make this a little less squished. I don't want this keyframe here, so I'm just going to delete it by right-clicking and deleting. And this is where you can have some fun messing around, animating a little bit of a bouncing ball. Okay, so I'm happy with my bounce animation. What I want to do is now I want to loop this throughout the entire video. And we can do that in the graph editor. So if I go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, these are all the keyframes that I've set. And all I have to do is go to Curves, Post Infinity, Cycle. So that's going to repeat all these keyframes. And the important thing is that your first keyframe and your last keyframe are the exact same. So you want to either copy and paste or middle mouse drag and hit S, because if it's not the same, it'll be a little jumpy. So now if we hit play, it's going to keep cycling through this little bounce. Last thing I want to do is just put a flatter texture on here. I'll put a new Lambert, and I'll crank up the ambient, and I'll make this a nice green.